Dr. Sarah Chen had never imagined that first contact with an alien species would happen while she was eating a peanut butter sandwich in the abandoned research station on Kepler 442b. The electromagnetic pulse that had knocked out their main communication array 3 days ago seemed like the worst of their problems. Now, staring at the massive creature that had just melted through the reinforced titanium blast door like it was made of butter, she realized how wonderfully simple equipment failures could be. The creature stood nearly 3 meters tall at its shoulder, its sleek form reminiscent of an enormous panther, crossed with something that belonged in humanity's deepest nightmares. Its fur seemed to absorb light itself, creating an unsettling void-black silhouette against the sterile white walls of the research facility. What truly made Sarah's breath catch, however, were not the obvious predator features, the retractable claws that could apparently cut through military-grade armor, or the rows of crystalline teeth that glinted like diamonds in the overhead lighting. It was the eyes. Intelligence burned behind those silver orbs, an awareness that made it clear this was no mere animal. The creature possessed technology that could disable their defenses without effort, had somehow tracked them across star systems, and now stood studying her with the patient curiosity of a scientist observing an interesting specimen. Sarah's hand moved slowly toward the emergency beacon on her belt, but froze as the creature's head tilted slightly. Not in threat, but in what appeared to be genuine curiosity. The massive alien predator was examining her movements with the same careful attention she might give to studying a new microorganism under her microscope. "Hello," she whispered, feeling somewhat ridiculous for attempting conversation with something that could clearly tear her apart without breaking stride. The creature's ears, pointed and mobile like those of an earth cat, swiveled forward. A sound emerged from its throat. Not quite a purr, not quite speech, but something that held unmistakable questioning intonation. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the creature was trying to communicate. Behind her, she could hear the panicked breathing of her research partner, Dr. Marcus Webb, who had been cataloging mineral samples when their visitor arrived. Marcus was probably running through the same calculations she had been moments before. Reinforced blast doors designed to withstand plasma cannon fire melted through like chocolate. Titanium carbide walls that could stop armor-piercing rounds, carved through with surgical precision. Their emergency beacon had a range of perhaps 50 kilometers on a good day, and the nearest Colonial Defense Force patrol was 3 systems away. Yet the creature had not attacked. Despite possessing the obvious capability to eliminate them instantly, it simply stood there, head cocked in that peculiarly feline manner, waiting. Sarah made a decision that would later be studied in xenobiology courses across human space. She slowly raised her hand, palm open, in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peaceful intent. The creature's silver eyes tracked the movement, and then something extraordinary happened. The massive alien lowered its head slightly, a gesture that seemed almost respectful. "My name is Sarah," she said, pointing to herself. "Sarah." The creature's response came as a series of harmonics that seemed to emanate from multiple parts of its body simultaneously. The sounds formed patterns, complex, layered, and unmistakably linguistic. Sarah felt her xenolinguistics training kick in as she tried to identify recurring elements, tonal structures, anything that might serve as a foundation for communication. Then the creature did something that made both humans gasp audibly. It extended one massive paw, easily large enough to crush Sarah's skull, and gently tapped its own chest. The harmonics came again, but this time focused into what sounded distinctly like a name. "Vorthkanal," Sarah repeated hesitantly, stumbling over the unfamiliar phonemes. The creature's ears flicked upward in what could only be described as pleased surprise. It repeated its name, then gestured toward Sarah with that same careful, controlled movement. For the next hour, the most dangerous-looking predator Sarah had ever encountered, sat patiently in their small research station, engaging in what could only be called language lessons. Vorth Kanal demonstrated an intelligence that quickly became obvious even to Marcus, who had spent the entire encounter pressed against the far wall, clutching a mineral scanner like it might somehow become a weapon. The alien learned human names with startling speed, mastering pronunciation that should have been impossible given the apparent structure of its vocal apparatus. More remarkably, it showed understanding of concepts beyond simple identification. When Sarah gestured to their damaged communication array and mimed frustration, Vorth Kanal approached the equipment with obvious interest. What followed challenged everything humanity thought it knew about technology and problem-solving. The alien examined their damaged systems with what appeared to be casual interest, occasionally producing tools from what Sarah could only assume were biological storage compartments. The tools themselves defied easy categorization. Some appeared to be grown rather than manufactured. Others seemed to phase between solid and energy states depending on their function. Within 30 minutes, their communication array was not only repaired but somehow improved. The signal strength readings showed output levels that exceeded the original specifications by nearly 300%. When Sarah attempted to understand how the repairs had been made, Vorth Kanal's explanations, conveyed through a combination of harmonics and surprisingly expressive gestures, suggested technologies that operated on principles human science had barely begun to theorize. Yet despite this display of casual technological superiority, what struck Sarah most was the aliens' behavior. Vorth Kanal showed patience with their slow understanding, repeated demonstrations without signs of irritation, and seemed genuinely interested in their primitive equipment. When Marcus finally worked up the courage to approach and show the alien their mineral samples, Vorth Kanal examined each specimen with careful attention, offering what appeared to be enthusiastic commentary on their discoveries. The turning point came when Sarah attempted to share some of her peanut butter sandwich. She had broken off a small piece, offering it tentatively while miming eating. Vorth Kanal examined the food with scientific interest, subjected it to what appeared to be some form of scanning using a device that emerged from its foreleg, then carefully consumed the sample. The alien's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. Its ears shot forward, eyes widened, and it produced a series of harmonics that sounded distinctly like surprised pleasure. When Sarah offered more, Vorth Kanal accepted it with what could only be described as gratitude. "It likes peanut butter," Marcus said in wonderment. "An alien predator that could probably level our entire colony, and it likes peanut butter." Sarah found herself smiling as she watched the massive creature carefully savor the simple earth food. There was something profoundly reassuring about discovering that even beings with technology centuries beyond human achievement could still appreciate the simple pleasure of an unexpected treat. As the hours passed, what had begun as terror gradually transformed into something approaching friendship. Vorth Kanal showed them images projected directly into the air, holographic displays that required no visible equipment. The images depicted worlds beyond imagination, vast cities that grew like forests, reaching into skies painted with multiple suns, space stations that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, creatures of incredible beauty and complexity living in harmony across thousands of star systems. Through patient communication, Sarah began to understand that Vorth Kanal belonged to a species called the Cathara, whose civilization spanned significant portions of the galaxy. They were explorers and scientists, seeking knowledge and making contact with emerging species. What humanity had achieved in reaching Kepler 442b had attracted their attention, not because the achievement was particularly impressive by Cathara standards, but because it represented something the Cathara valued above technological prowess: curiosity, the drive to explore and understand, even when such exploration required tremendous effort and risk. Fourth Canal conveyed that the Cathara had been observing human expansion into space with growing interest. Not because humans possessed advanced technology, but because they demonstrated the same fundamental desire to reach beyond their origins that had driven Cathara civilization for millennia. When their emergency beacon finally connected with a colonial defense force patrol, Sarah felt an unexpected sadness at the thought of this encounter ending. Fourth Canal seemed to share the sentiment, producing harmonics that carried clear emotional undertones of regret. But as the alien prepared to leave, it did something that would change the course of human history. Fourth Canal approached Sarah directly, extended its massive head toward her, and gently nuzzled against her shoulder in an unmistakable gesture of affection. For a moment that stretched into eternity, a human scientist found herself embracing a being that could have destroyed everything she knew without effort, yet had chosen instead to share knowledge, patience, and something that could only be called friendship. When the rescue ship arrived 6 hours later, they found Dr. Sarah Chen and Dr. Marcus Webb alive, unharmed, and in possession of enough xenological data to revolutionize human understanding of the galaxy. But what Sarah remembered most was not the advanced technology or the staggering implications for human civilization. She remembered the warmth of an alien predator's gentle touch and the realization that intelligence and compassion were not uniquely human traits, but universal characteristics that could bridge any gap between species. 3 months after first contact, the research station on Kepler 442b had transformed into something unprecedented in human history. A permanent diplomatic embassy hosting an alien species that could have conquered Earth without breaking stride, yet instead had chosen to become humanity's teacher and friend. Dr. Sarah Chen walked through corridors that now hummed with technology she was still learning to understand. The Cathara had shared enough knowledge to revolutionize human engineering, but they had done so gradually, ensuring humans could comprehend and safely implement each advancement. What impressed Sarah most was not the technology itself, but the patience Fourth Canal showed in explaining concepts that were clearly elementary by Cathara standards. The massive alien had taken up residence in the station's largest cargo bay, which had been converted into a living space that accommodated both Fourth Canal's physical needs and their technological requirements. The walls now featured what Fourth Canal called growth pods, organic technological hybrids that could manufacture almost any tool or device needed for their research. Sarah found Fourth Canal in their usual morning position, sprawled across a platform that adjusted its surface to provide optimal comfort, while the alien's various technological implants recharged through direct contact with Cathara power sources. The sight still amazed her, a being that could level mountains with casual effort, lying contentedly while dozens of small maintenance drones, creatures that seemed to be part technology, part biology, scurried across their dark fur performing routine care. "Good morning, Fourth Canal," Sarah said, using the pronunciation that had become natural after weeks of practice. The alien's eyes opened immediately, and the harmonics of their greeting carried warm undertones that Sarah had learned to recognize as genuine pleasure. Fourth Canal had mastered basic human speech within their first week together, but they still preferred to communicate in their own language when possible. Sarah had become surprisingly proficient at understanding the complex tonal patterns, though her own attempts at Cathara speech still amused her alien friend. "Sarah, teacher friend," Fourth Canal replied in accented but clear English, using the compound designation they had created to express concepts that had no direct translation between their species. "Today we continue the learning sharing of your mathematics art." Sarah smiled. Fourth Canal had become fascinated with human mathematical proofs, not because they were particularly advanced. Cathara mathematics operated on principles that made human calculus look like basic arithmetic, but because of what they revealed about human thought processes. The alien found human approaches to problem-solving endlessly interesting, often spending hours analyzing the logical pathways humans use to reach conclusions. "Actually," Sarah said, settling into the specially designed chair that allowed comfortable conversation with someone nearly 3 meters tall, "I wanted to ask you about something different today. The Colonial Defense Force has been asking questions about Cathara military capabilities." Vorth Kanal's ears flicked back slightly. A gesture Sarah had learned indicated mild displeasure or concern. "The warriors of space seek knowledge of destroying tools?" "They're worried," Sarah admitted. "Your technology is so far beyond ours that some people are afraid. They want to know if your species poses a threat to humanity." The response was immediate and unmistakable. Vorth Kanal rose to their full height, and for a moment, Sarah was reminded of exactly how dangerous her friend truly was. When Cathara moved with purpose, they did so with fluid grace that spoke of perfect physical control and devastating potential. The air itself seemed to thrum with barely contained energy as Vorth Kanal's technological implants automatically came online. Then, just as quickly, the alien settled back down and produced what Sarah had come to recognize as their equivalent of a sigh. "The fear feeling is understood," Vorth Kanal said carefully. "Cathara have met many species of beginnings. Always comes the question of destroying power." "And what do you tell them?" Vorth Kanal was quiet for a long moment, their silver eyes distant. When they finally spoke, their harmonics carried undertones Sarah had never heard before, something ancient and deeply sad. 73 species have the Cathara encountered in the time of my living. Of these, 41 chose the path of fear violence when they learned of our capabilities. They believed that safety came from attacking before being attacked. Sarah felt a chill. "What happened to them?" "They exist no longer." The simple statement hung in the air like a physical weight. Sarah struggled to process the implications. 41 entire species, eliminated because they had chosen violence over cooperation. "But not by Cathara choice," Vorth Kanal continued quickly, apparently reading her expression. "Cathara do not make war. When species choose violence path, they destroy themselves. Fear of the powerful leads to weapons building. Weapons building leads to suspicion among their own kind. Suspicion leads to conflict, and conflict leads to ending. You're saying that species destroy themselves when they focus on military responses to superior technology?" "Always the same pattern," Vorth Kanal confirmed sadly. "They see Cathara power, believe they must match or exceed it for safety. They pour all resources into weapons making, neglect the growth learning that brought Cathara notice in the first place. Society breaks apart from the pressure, sometimes quickly, sometimes across many generations, but always the same ending." Sarah thought about the reports she had been receiving from Earth. Military budgets expanding rapidly as governments demanded crash programs to reverse engineer Cathara technology. Scientific programs being redirected toward weapons development. Political tensions rising as different factions argued about how to respond to the existence of vastly superior alien civilization. And the 32 species that survived? Vorth Kanal's mood immediately brightened, their harmonics taking on the warm undertones that Sarah associated with the aliens' genuine happiness. They chose the path humans are choosing, curiosity over fear, learning over destroying. They saw Cathara power and asked, "How can we understand?" instead of, "How can we fight?" What happened to them? "They became Cathara." Sarah blinked in surprise. "You mean they joined your civilization?" "Cathara is not one species' birth," Vorth Kanal explained patiently. "Cathara is the choosing. those who choose knowledge over ignorance, cooperation over competition, growth over fear. These become Cathara regardless of the body form they wear. The implications staggered Sarah. The Cathara civilization was actually a multi-species alliance, united not by biology, but by philosophy. A confederation of beings who had chosen to embrace discovery and mutual advancement over territorial competition and military posturing. Is that what you're offering humanity? A chance to become Cathara? The choice is not Cathara's to offer, Vorth Kanal replied. The choice is humanity's to make. Cathara provides knowledge, friendship, example, but each species must choose its own path. Over the following days, Sarah found herself thinking constantly about Vorth Kanal's words. The alien had shared stories of other species that had faced the same crossroads humanity now confronted. The Veltar, whose scientific achievements had earned Cathara attention, but who had chosen to develop planet-killing weapons in response to contact. They had turned those weapons on each other within 50 years, reducing their entire civilization to radioactive ash. The Kelm Norai, who had spent 3 centuries trying to develop technology capable of threatening Cathara forces, ultimately creating an artificial intelligence that had judged its creators too dangerous to exist. But there were success stories, too. The Zith Kala, whose philosophical traditions of patience and learning had made them natural partners for the Cathara. The Merthuna, whose artistic sensibilities had contributed new forms of beauty to Cathara culture. Species that had chosen trust over suspicion and had been rewarded with knowledge, protection, and a place in a galactic civilization that spanned millions of worlds. The critical test came when a Colonial Defense Force battle group arrived at Kepler 442b with orders to assess the alien threat and establish appropriate security protocols. Sarah watched from the observation deck as humanity's most advanced warships took up positions around the station. Their weapon systems powered, but not yet targeted. Vorth Kanal had been aware of the approaching fleet long before human sensors detected them. Cathara technology operated on principles that made their ships effectively invisible to human detection, but they had chosen to remain visible and stationary, making no threatening moves despite the obvious military intentions of the approaching force. Admiral Rebecca Torres, commanding officer of the battle group, arrived at the station with a full security detail and an attitude that made Sarah's heart sink. The Admiral was everything Sarah had feared. A career military officer who saw every interaction as a potential battle, every relationship as a potential threat to be neutralized. Dr. Chen, Admiral Torres said without preamble, you will provide a full briefing on alien capabilities, weaknesses, and tactical vulnerabilities. This facility is now under military authority. Admiral, Sarah replied carefully, I don't think you understand the situation here. Vorth Kanal is not a prisoner or a threat. They are our guest and our teacher. Doctor, this creature represents a clear and present danger to human survival. Our analysis of the technology samples you've transmitted suggests capabilities that could threaten Earth itself. We need to understand how to defend against them. Before Sarah could respond, Vorth Kanal appeared in the corridor behind them. The alien moved with their usual fluid grace, but Sarah could see the subtle signs of readiness that meant their friend was fully alert and prepared for potential conflict. Admiral Torres and her security detail immediately raised their weapons, plasma rifles targeting the massive alien. Vorth Kanal stopped moving and adopted what Sarah recognized as a completely non-threatening posture. Head lowered, claws retracted, technological implants powered down to minimal levels. Admiral Torres of the Human Military of Space, Vorth Kanal said in carefully pronounced English. Cathara greets you with respect and hope for understanding sharing. Stand down, Admiral Torres barked. You will submit to restraint and interrogation. What happened next would later be analyzed frame by military strategists across human space. Vorth did not resist or retaliate. Instead, they simply stood completely still while Admiral Torres's security team attempted to place restraints designed for the largest human prisoners on a being whose physical capabilities made such devices meaningless. The restraints designed to hold beings weighing up to 200 kilograms were applied to someone who weighed nearly 800 kilograms and possessed strength that could crush tank armor. The devices looked ridiculous, like party streamers on a battleship. Yet Vorth made no move to remove them, instead standing patiently while Admiral Torres conducted what she called a security interview. Sarah watched in growing horror as the Admiral demanded information about Cathara military forces, weapon capabilities, and strategic vulnerabilities. Each question was answered with patient honesty that revealed just how completely outmatched humanity would be in any hypothetical conflict. Cathara ships were not merely faster than human vessels. They existed partially outside normal space-time, making them effectively immune to human weapons. Cathara individuals were not merely strong, they were living weapons platforms with capabilities that exceeded anything in the human military arsenal. Cathara civilization did not merely span more territory than humanity could imagine. It operated on principles of physics that humanity had barely begun to discover. Yet through it all, Vorth answered every question with the same patient honesty they had shown Sarah during their first language lessons. No hostility, no threats, no indication that being treated like a prisoner caused anything more than mild disappointment. The interview continued for hours, until Admiral Torres finally asked the question that Sarah had been dreading. What would happen if humanity decided you were too dangerous to allow your presence in our space? Vorth response was immediate, honest, and terrifying in its simplicity. Cathara would withdraw and place humanity under observation until you had chosen your final path. And if we chose to develop weapons capable of threatening your people? Then humanity would join the 41 species that chose fear over friendship. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Admiral Torres's aide quietly updating their tactical assessment. Sarah could see the calculations running behind the Admiral's eyes. An alien species with overwhelming technological superiority, offering friendship and knowledge, asking nothing in return except the choice to respond with curiosity rather than hostility. A species that had watched 41 civilizations choose violence and self-destruction and was now offering humanity the same choice that 32 other species had successfully navigated. Admiral Torres made her decision with the same military precision she brought to every command choice. She ordered her security team to remove the restraints, formally apologized to Vorth for the hostile treatment, and requested permission to establish formal diplomatic protocols. You could have destroyed our entire fleet without effort, Admiral Torres said quietly. Why didn't you? Vorth response came with harmonics that carried deep emotional undertones. Sadness for those who had chosen differently, hope for what humanity might become, and something that could only be described as affection for the strange, violent, curious species that had impressed them enough to merit direct contact. Because Sarah teacher-friend shared food of caring with Cathara. Because humans choose to reach beyond their world of birth despite great difficulty. Because humanity shows the curiosity drive that makes species worthy of friendship. As Admiral Torres' fleet withdrew to establish appropriate diplomatic distance, Sarah found herself once again sitting with Vorth in their converted cargo bay. The alien was sprawled in their comfortable position, but their mood seemed different, lighter, more hopeful. The test is passed? Sarah asked. The first test is passed, Vorth confirmed. Humanity has chosen dialogue over destruction, learning over conquest. But greater tests will come. Other voices among your people will demand different choices. And if they succeed? Vorth Kanal's response carried the weight of 73 previous encounters with emerging species. Then Cathara will remember Sarah, teacher friend who shared food of caring, and Marcus, scientist friend who showed mineral discoveries with pride, and Torres, warrior friend who chose wisdom over fear. We will remember that humanity had those capable of making good choices, even if the majority chose otherwise. Sarah realized that the fate of her entire species now rested on humanity's ability to make the same choice that 32 other civilizations had successfully navigated. To see opportunity where others saw threat, to choose cooperation where others chose competition, and to embrace the unknown rather than fear it. 1 year after first contact, Earth faced its defining moment. The Cathara embassy on Kepler 442b had become a bustling center of interspecies cooperation, but back on humanity's homeworld, the debate over the alien question had reached a critical point that would determine the future of human civilization. Dr. Sarah Chen stood before the United Earth Council, representing not just the scientific community, but the hopes of everyone who believed humanity could choose wisdom over fear. The council chamber buzzed with tension as representatives from every nation, corporation, and military organization prepared to make the most important decision in human history. Beside her, a holographic projection of Vorth Kanal waited patiently. The Cathara had agreed to answer direct questions from Earth's leadership, despite the obvious risk that their responses might influence humanity toward the path of fear and self-destruction that had claimed 41 other species. "Ladies and gentlemen of the Council," Sarah began, her voice carrying across the chamber, "we stand at a crossroads that will define not just our species' future, but our children's place in the galaxy. The choice before us is simple in concept, but profound in implications. Do we choose to grow, or do we choose to fear?" The first speaker to respond was General Harrison Burke, representative of the Global Defense Coalition. His position had been clear from the moment Cathara existence became public knowledge. "Dr. Chen, with all due respect to your scientific achievements, you're asking us to ignore the fundamental principles of survival that have kept humanity alive since we first discovered fire. When faced with a superior predator, the rational response is to develop defenses, not to roll over and hope for mercy." General Burke activated his own holographic display, showing tactical assessments that had consumed billions of dollars and thousands of humanity's brightest military minds. "The entity you call Friend possesses individual capabilities that exceed our most advanced weapons platforms. Their technology operates on principles our physicists barely comprehend. Their civilization spans territories that would take human ships millennia to cross. And you want us to trust them based on their behavior toward 2 isolated researchers?" Sarah felt the familiar chill that came from hearing humanity's situation described in purely military terms. But before she could respond, Vorth Kanal's harmonics filled the chamber. "General Burke speaks truth of facts," the alien said in carefully modulated English. "Cathara power exceeds human capability by measures that make comparison difficult. But General Burke speaks only partial truth. The question is not whether Cathara could harm humanity. The question is whether Cathara chooses to harm humanity. And what guarantee do we have of your peaceful intentions?" demanded Dr. Elizabeth Reyes, representing the European Science Consortium. "Your own statements indicate that 41 species have been eliminated after contact with your civilization. How do we know humanity won't become number 42? Vorth Kanal's response carried undertones of deep sadness. Dr. Reyes asks for guarantee of safety that Cathara cannot provide, not because Cathara lacks power to provide safety, but because safety does not come from external guarantee. Safety comes from wisdom of choice." The alien paused, then continued with harmonics that seemed to resonate directly with human emotional centers. 41 species chose to seek safety through strength building. They believed that becoming dangerous would protect them from danger. Each discovered that the weapons they built to defend against Cathara became weapons they used against each other. Cathara did not destroy them. They destroyed themselves with their own fear. "That's a convenient excuse," interjected President Maria Santos of the South American Federation. "You're saying that every species that tried to defend themselves somehow magically self-destructed. That seems statistically impossible." Sarah watched Vorth Kanal carefully consider their response. The alien had explained this pattern to her many times, but she knew the council needed to hear it directly. President Santos speaks of statistics. Cathara has observed this pattern across 1,000 cycles of time. When species learns of greater power, two paths appear. First path, curiosity about the source of power, desire to understand and grow. Second path, fear of the power, desire to match or exceed it for protection. Vorth Kanal's harmonics took on the rhythm of a teacher explaining a fundamental natural law. Species choosing first path discovers that power comes from knowledge, cooperation, patience. They grow in understanding, become capable of joining greater community. Species choosing second path discovers that power-seeking requires sacrifice of knowledge growth, cooperation, patience. They become strong but not wise, capable of destruction but not creation. "And then what?" asked Director Chen Wei of the Asian Economic Zone. "Then they fragment. Strong without wisdom always leads to conflict within species. Some members want to use new power against perceived enemies. Others want to use power to control their own kind. Others want to use power to take what they desire. Division leads to internal war. Internal war leads to use of the very weapons they built for protection, and protection weapons become extinction weapons." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Humanity was not just choosing how to respond to an alien civilization. They were choosing whether to embark on a path that had historically led to self-annihilation for every species that had chosen fear over curiosity. Director Sarah Kim of the Pacific Trade Alliance raised the question that Sarah had been dreading. What specific advantages would humanity gain from cooperation with your civilization? What can you offer us that would justify the risks? Vorth Kanal's response began with a gesture toward the holographic display, which immediately filled with images that took Sarah's breath away, despite having seen them many times before. Worlds where cities grew like living forests, their buildings reaching toward skies painted with the light of multiple stars. Space habitats that existed in perfect harmony with the cosmic phenomena around them, generating energy from stellar winds and gravitational fields. Transportation systems that moved individuals across galactic distances in the time it took Sarah to walk across the research station. Cathara offers knowledge sharing of technologies that make energy unlimited, distance meaningless, scarcity impossible. Medical understanding that extends lifespan beyond current human imagining. Agricultural methods that could feed billion-fold greater population without environmental damage. The images continued. Terraforming technologies that could transform dead worlds into gardens, manufacturing systems that could create any desired object from basic elements, computational networks that could answer questions about the fundamental nature of reality. But greatest gift is not technology, Vorth Kanal continued. Greatest gift is participation in community of growing species, 32 civilizations sharing knowledge, art, philosophy, dreams, universe exploration, guided by wisdom of many perspectives, problems solved through cooperation of minds that think in ways no single species could imagine. General Burke's response was immediate. And the cost? What do you require in return for these miraculous gifts? Vorth Kanal's answer was simple and terrifying in its implications. Cathara requires only that humanity choose growth over fear, cooperation over conflict, wisdom over power. Species cannot be forced to make this choice, cannot be bribed to make this choice, cannot be threatened into making this choice. Choice must come from species' own nature, own values, own decision about what kind of beings they want to become. And if we choose the path of military development, asked Admiral Torres, who had joined the session via secure connection from the Kepler 442b system, then Cathara will withdraw and hope that humanity proves different from the previous 41. The debate that followed lasted 18 hours. Representatives argued about national security, technological sovereignty, cultural preservation, and economic implications. Some pointed to humanity's history of violence and suggested that military preparedness was simply human nature. Others argued that humanity's greatest achievements had always come from cooperation and exploration rather than conflict and conquest. Sarah found herself thinking about her first encounter with Vorth Kanal, a being capable of destroying their research station without effort, who had instead chosen to sit patiently while she attempted to teach them English, an alien predator who had shown more interest in sharing peanut butter than in demonstrating their overwhelming technological superiority. The turning point came when Dr. Marcus Webb, Sarah's research partner, was called to testify via hologram from the Cathara embassy. "Council members," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent a year working directly with Cathara technology. "I've seen what their civilization offers. I've watched Vorth Kanal solve engineering problems that would take our best teams decades to address. I've seen technologies that could eliminate poverty, disease, and resource scarcity across human space." Marcus paused, then continued with obvious emotion. "But I've also seen something more important. I've watched a being with godlike power show infinite patience with human limitations. I've seen an alien predator who could crush tank armor choose instead to be gentle with creatures they could eliminate without thinking. I've witnessed a civilization that spans the galaxy, yet takes time to answer the questions of barely spacefaring humans with the same respect they would show their own greatest scholars. The question isn't whether we can trust them," Marcus concluded. "The question is whether we're worthy of the trust they're showing us." The final vote was closer than Sarah had hoped, but decisive enough to set humanity's course. By a margin of 57%, the United Earth Council chose cooperation over competition, growth over fear, and curiosity over suspicion. The announcement was made simultaneously across human space. Humanity would accept Cathara partnership and begin the process of joining the galactic community of growing species. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Some celebrated humanity's entry into a galactic civilization that offered technologies beyond imagination. Others protested the surrender to alien influence and called for resistance movements to preserve human independence. But for Sarah, standing in the Cathara embassy as the news arrived, the most important reaction came from Vorth Kanal themselves. The massive alien approached her directly, lowered their great head, and nuzzled against her shoulder with the same gentle affection they had shown during their first meeting. The harmonics that emerged carried emotional undertones that needed no translation: joy, relief, hope, and something that could only be described as profound love for the strange species that had chosen wisdom over fear. 33 growing species now, Vorth Kanal said softly. Sarah, teacher friends, people have chosen the path of growing. Cathara is pleased beyond expression capacity. Over the following months, as human technology began its rapid advancement under Cathara guidance, as human explorers gained access to regions of space previously unimaginable, as human minds expanded to encompass concepts that redefined the boundaries of possibility, Sarah often reflected on the choice her species had made. They had been offered partnership by beings who could have taken everything humans possessed without effort, yet who had chosen instead to share knowledge, patience, and friendship. They had faced the ultimate test of species maturity, the ability to respond to overwhelming power with curiosity rather than fear, with trust rather than suspicion, with hope rather than despair. And they had passed. The creature that could flatten tanks without effort continued to nuzzle humans affectionately, not because they were weak and harmless, but because they had proven themselves worthy of the affection of beings whose power was matched only by their wisdom. Humanity had chosen to grow rather than merely survive, to explore rather than merely defend, to trust rather than merely endure. And in making that choice, they had earned their place among the species mature enough to handle the responsibilities that came with true cosmic citizenship. The galaxy was vast, full of wonders and challenges that would occupy humanity for millennia to come. But they would face that future not as frightened primitives hiding from superior forces, but as junior partners in a civilization dedicated to growth, discovery, and the endless pursuit of knowledge. Sarah watched through the embassy's observation deck as Cathara ships arrived to begin the first phase of human technological integration. Massive vessels that existed partially outside normal space-time, carrying teachers, philosophers, scientists, and artists from 32 different species, all coming to welcome humanity into the greatest community the galaxy had ever known. And at the center of it all, sprawled contentedly in their favorite sunny spot, was the alien predator who had chosen to share peanut butter with a nervous human scientist, and had thereby changed the course of galactic history forever.